The GPS on my dashboard flickered and died exactly 3 miles before I reached Mystic Falls, leaving me staring at a blank screen like a prophet who had just lost his ability to see the future. My name is Jeremy, and I am 28 years old. I had been driving for 14 hours straight, escaping the suffocating reality of my failed life in Boston. My career had crumbled like ancient parchment. My relationship had ended in spectacular fashion with accusations and broken glass, and I needed to disappear into the vastness of America to find something resembling redemption, or at least oblivion. The highway had become my confessor, and the endless road my absolution. The October evening was settling into that peculiar darkness that only rural America knows, where the sky transforms into something alien and unknowable. My 2015 Honda Civic had been sputtering along Route 7 for the better part of the afternoon, and I had been watching the landscape shift from cultivated suburbia to dense forests and abandoned farmhouses. The trees pressed in from both sides of the road like silent sentinels guarding secrets they would never tell. No other cars had passed me in the last 2 hours. No civilization seemed to exist in this corner of Vermont. It was as though I had driven off the edge of the known world and into some forgotten realm where the rules of reality operated differently. The sign appeared suddenly, materializing from the gathering gloom like a warning from the universe itself. Mystic Falls, population 1847. Below that, someone had spray-painted in faded red letters, "Turn back." I should have turned back. I should have throttled the accelerator and driven through the night until I found a proper town with chain hotels and fluorescent lights and the comforting hum of civilization. But I did not turn back. I drove forward because I had been running towards something for so long that I no longer knew how to stop moving. The town emerged from the forest gradually, as though materializing from a dream. The main street was lined with Victorian buildings that had seen better centuries. The storefronts were mostly dark, their windows reflecting nothing but my headlights as I rolled slowly down the main thoroughfare. A movie theater announced a showing that had ended in 1987. A diner called Rosie's glowed with warm light, and through the windows, I could see people sitting in booths eating quietly, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of table lamps. Everything felt suspended in time, as though Mystic Falls existed in some pocket dimension where the 20th century still held dominion over the landscape. I pulled into a parking space in front of the Mystic Falls Inn, a 3-story colonial building painted a deep forest green with white trim. The paint was peeling in places, revealing the weathered wood beneath. The sign hanging from the second floor was hand-painted and elegant. Mystic Falls Inn, established 1873. I grabbed my single duffel bag from the trunk and headed inside, the cool October air raising goosebumps on my arms. The temperature had dropped significantly in the last few minutes, as though the sun had taken all warmth with it when it disappeared beyond the western hills. The lobby of the inn was exactly what I expected. Floral wallpaper, a Persian rug that had faded to dusty rose, and an antique desk that looked like it had been there since the inn was built. Behind the desk sat a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair pulled into a severe bun. She looked up from her book as I approached, and her expression shifted from neutral to something that resembled concern. "We are closing early tonight," she said before I could even open my mouth to request a room. "I cannot rent you a room." "The sign says you have vacancy," I replied, pointing toward the window where a neon sign flickered in the darkness. The woman set down her book with deliberate care. "That sign is a mistake. We are fully booked. Every room is taken." I could see the rack of keys behind her. At least 30 hooks held no keys at all, which meant rooms were available. I had encountered many strange situations in my 28 years of life, but this was peculiar in a way that made my instincts scream warnings I chose to ignore. "Look," I said, attempting to smile in a way that had once been charming. "I have been driving for 14 hours. I just need a place to sleep for one night. I will pay double your normal rate." The woman's expression hardened. "It is not about money. It is not safe for you to stay in Mystic Falls. Not at night. Not ever, really, but especially not at night." Before I could ask what she meant, the front door burst open behind me, and a young man about my age rushed inside. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes that assessed the situation with immediate intelligence. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, and his boots left traces of mud on the polished floor. "Eleanor, you should not be having guests tonight," he said, his voice carrying an undertone of urgency. He turned to me, and his entire demeanor shifted to something approximating a welcoming smile. "I'm Stefan. Welcome to Mystic Falls. I assume you do not know about the rules." "What rules?" I asked, suddenly feeling as though I had stepped into a conversation that had already been happening for years before my arrival. Stefan gestured toward a small sitting area off to the side of the lobby. "Come, we should talk. Eleanor, perhaps you could bring us some coffee." Eleanor disappeared into a back room without responding, and Stefan guided me to a worn leather sofa that faced a fireplace where flames danced among artificial logs. The fireplace was the only source of warmth in the room, and I found myself gravitating toward it, drawn by an instinctive need for comfort in a situation that was becoming increasingly surreal. "My name is Stefan," he repeated, extending his hand. I shook it and found his grip firm and reassuring. "I can see by your expression that you are confused. That is normal. Everyone who comes to Mystic Falls for the first time is confused by what they find here. I am just passing through," I said, though the statement felt like a lie even as it left my mouth. I needed a place to stay for the night. "I was planning to leave in the morning." Stefan leaned back in the sofa, his expression becoming grave. "I understand. But before you can even consider staying in Mystic Falls, you need to understand the rules. They are not optional, and they are not negotiable. They are the only thing that keeps us alive in this town." Eleanor returned with a tray bearing 2 mugs of steaming coffee and a plate of shortbread cookies. She set them on the table between Stefan and myself, then retreated to the lobby desk without speaking. The coffee smelled rich and dark and slightly bitter. "The first rule," Stefan began, wrapping his hands around his mug, "is that no one leaves their home after 8 p.m. Not for any reason. Not if the house is on fire. Not if someone is dying. Nothing is worth the risk of being outside after 8 p.m. I thought he was joking. I waited for the punchline that never came. "The second rule," he continued, "is that all doors and windows must be locked and secured before sunset. All of them. Every single entry point to your residence must be sealed." "Why?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand that the question was naive. "Because Damon walks the streets of Mystic Falls at night," Stefan said quietly. "Damon is a vampire. He has been hunting in this town for over 150 years. He kills people who venture outside after dark. He feeds on them. He leaves their bodies in the forest for the search parties to find. Or sometimes he does not leave bodies at all." I laughed. It was an involuntary response, a nervous eruption that I could not control. "You are serious, completely serious." I wish I were joking. I wish this was some elaborate prank to scare new visitors. But it is not. Damon is real. He is out there right now, somewhere in the darkness waiting for someone foolish enough to break the rules. "This is insane," I said, reaching for the coffee despite my skepticism. The warmth of the mug felt good in my hands. "Yes," Stefan agreed. "It is insane, but it is also true. We have learned to live with this reality. We have learned to accept the rules because the alternative is death." Eleanor approached again, this time carrying a thick leather journal. She placed it on the table in front of me, and I realized it was a logbook of some kind. Inside the front cover, written in careful script, were the words, "Victims of Damon, a record of the lost." I opened the book with trembling fingers. The entries dated back to 1873, the same year the inn was established. The pages were filled with names, dates, and brief descriptions of the victims. I saw entries like Thomas Whitmore, age 34, found near the old mill with his throat torn open. July 3, 1891. And Rebecca Clark, age 19, disappeared from Main Street. Body never recovered. August 17, 1923. The entries continued chronologically, advancing through decades. Some entries were in pencil, faded and hard to read. Others were in recent ink, still dark and clear. "This is a record of every person Damon has killed or taken," Stefan explained. "The last entry is from 6 months ago. A woman named Catherine. She ignored the rules. She thought she was special. She thought she could drive home from the diner after closing at 9 p.m. They found her 3 days later in the woods behind the cemetery." I closed the journal quickly, feeling suddenly ill. "How is this not on the news? How has no one called the police?" "The police know," Eleanor said, returning to the conversation. She stood by the fireplace, her arms crossed over her chest. The state police know. The FBI knows. But what can they do? They have sent investigators over the years. They have tried to trap Damon. They have set up surveillance and checkpoints. None of it has worked. Damon is not a normal criminal. He is something ancient and powerful, and he cannot be stopped through conventional methods. There has to be something, I protested. Some way to stop him, to kill him. Stefan and Eleanor exchanged glances, and in that silent communication I understood that they had heard this argument many times before. Damon has a rule of his own, Stefan said slowly. He cannot enter a building without being invited inside. As long as the doors are locked and no one invites him in, we are safe. Inside our homes, we are protected. Outside, we are prey. The absurdity of the situation was overwhelming. I wanted to run. I wanted to drive away from Mystic Falls and never return. But part of me, the part that had been broken and battered by life, wanted to stay, wanted to see if this impossible thing was real, wanted to understand how an entire town could function under such impossible circumstances. Can I stay at the inn? I asked Eleanor. She nodded slowly. The rules apply to you as much as anyone else. You must be inside by 8 p.m., all doors locked, all windows sealed. You cannot leave until sunrise. If you break the rules, Damon will hunt you, and he will not stop until he has killed you. What time is sunset? I asked. 6:47 p.m., Stefan replied. You have approximately 2 hours to get settled and gather whatever supplies you need. After that, you must be inside. I checked my watch. It was 4:52 p.m., 2 hours. I had 2 hours to acclimate myself to the fact that I was now trapped in a town with a vampire. My room at the Mystic Falls Inn was on the second floor, facing Main Street. It was decorated in the same faded floral style as the lobby, with a queen-sized bed draped in a pink comforter and lace pillows that looked like they had not been updated since 1987. There was a window with heavy velvet curtains and wooden shutters that could be locked from the inside. A small desk held a television that looked like it had never been used. The bathroom was surprisingly modern, with updated fixtures that seemed incongruous with the rest of the room. Stefan had offered to show me around town before dark, and I had accepted eagerly. Anything was better than sitting alone in my room, wrestling with the cognitive dissonance of accepting the existence of a vampire as a regular part of small-town life. We walked down Main Street as the sun began its descent toward the western hills. The temperature was dropping noticeably, and I wished I had brought a heavier jacket. The shops were closing early, their proprietors moving with purposeful haste to secure their storefronts before darkness fell. How did this start? I asked Stefan as we walked past a closed hardware store. How did a vampire end up in Mystic Falls in the first place? No one knows for certain, Stefan replied. The historical records are unclear. What we know is that Damon appeared in the town around 1870, a few years before the Civil War ended. He arrived alone and took residence in an old mansion on the outskirts of town. At first, people thought he was just a wealthy newcomer, but then people started disappearing. At night, without explanation. It took the town a while to understand what he was. We passed Rosie's diner, and through the windows I could see it was nearly empty. The few patrons who remained were lingering over coffee, and I could see the proprietor, a woman with red hair, watching the clock with evident anxiety. What happened when they figured it out? I asked. They tried to kill him, Stefan said bluntly. They formed a mob with torches and pitchforks like something out of a movie. They went to his mansion around midnight with the intention of burning it down with him inside. But Damon was faster and stronger than they anticipated. He killed 17 men that night. The survivors fled, and the town decided that confrontation was futile. We had to find a way to coexist. By establishing these rules, I said. By establishing these rules, Stefan confirmed. Over the decades, we have learned how to live with Damon. We have learned that he follows his own code. He does not break into homes. He does not violate the sanctuary of a locked door. It is as though he respects the tradition of invitation, a relic of some older vampire law that he still adheres to. As long as we follow the rules, as long as we do not invite him in, as long as we do not go outside after dark, we are relatively safe. We turned down a side street, and Stefan pointed out a large Victorian mansion set back from the road. It was painted a sickly shade of yellow that had faded and peeled in multiple places. The windows were dark, and the fence surrounding the property was rusted and broken in several places. That was Damon's original residence, Stefan said quietly. He abandoned it about 30 years ago. No one knows where he lives now. Some people think he sleeps in the forest. Others believe he has a hideout in the caves up in the mountains. The truth is, we do not know, and we do not want to know. As long as he stays away from us during the day, we do not ask questions. A clock tower in the center of the town square began to chime, and I counted the bells. 5 o'clock. The sun was casting long shadows across the street, and the light was taking on that peculiar golden quality that precedes twilight. "We should head back," Stefan said, glancing toward the western sky. "We have less than 2 hours now, and you need to be inside, secured before 8 p.m. The rules are absolute. Damon does not tolerate violations." We walked back toward the inn in silence, and I became aware of how the town was transforming as darkness approached. Shop owners were locking their doors with double bolts. Window blinds were being drawn. A few people hurried down the sidewalk with their eyes forward, not acknowledging us, moving with the purposefulness of those who understood the consequences of lingering. Back at the inn, Eleanor had left a folder in my room containing a packet of information. Inside were copies of the rules printed in a large font on white paper. There were also lists of emergency supplies, recommendations for entertainment while trapped indoors, and a section titled "What to Do if Damon Tries to Enter." This last section contained instructions for barricading doors, reinforcing windows, and what to do if glass broke. It was like reading an instruction manual for surviving a siege. By 6:30 p.m. I had drawn all the curtains, locked all the windows, and secured the wooden shutters. I had checked the lock on the door at least a dozen times. I sat on the bed and watched the clock, waiting for 8 p.m. to arrive, though I did not understand what would happen at that moment. Nothing physical, I assumed. No supernatural chime that would transform Damon into something more dangerous than he already was. But psychologically, the stroke of 8 marked a transition between two states of being, the relatively safe day and the dangerous night. At 7:45 p.m., I heard Stefan knock on my door. I opened it to find him holding a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "I thought you might appreciate some company," he said. "The first night in Mystic Falls is the hardest. The fear is almost overwhelming. It helps to have someone to talk to." I welcomed him inside, and we sat in the 2 chairs facing the fireplace while I turned on the television to provide some background noise and the illusion of normalcy. Stefan opened the wine, a red blend from a Vermont winery, and we drank in companionable silence for a while. "How long have you lived here?" I asked eventually. "My whole life," Stefan replied. 29 years. I was born in Mystic Falls, and I have never left. My parents were born here too. My father runs a bookstore on Main Street. My mother is the town librarian. Everyone in Mystic Falls has lived here for generations. We are a closed community, bound together by necessity and fear. "Do not you ever want to leave?" I asked. "Every day," Stefan said quietly. "But I cannot. I have tried. I drove away when I was 18 years old, convinced that there had to be something better elsewhere. I made it as far as New York City. I lasted 3 weeks before the anxiety overwhelmed me. I could not shake the feeling that I was missing something essential to my survival. I came back. That is the power Damon has over this town," I said, understanding suddenly. "He does not just kill people. He imprisons the entire community." "Yes," Stefan agreed.
"He has imprisoned us through fear."
"We have built a prison where the walls are not made of stone but of darkness and the unknown. And the worst part is that we cannot even imagine what freedom would look like anymore. The rules have been in place so long that they have become natural. We follow them without thinking, the way we follow any other rule of civilization." At 7:58 p.m., Stefan stood up to leave. "I need to get home before the hour changes," he said. "You will be safe here. Lock the door behind me. Do not open it for anyone, no matter what they say or what they claim. There have been cases of Damon trying to trick people into opening doors by pretending to be a friend or a family member." "How did that work out?" I asked. "Never successfully," Stefan assured me. "The people of Mystic Falls are too paranoid to be fooled. But still, it is better to be certain than to take chances." After Stefan left, I locked the door and engaged the deadbolt. I stood at the window and watched the clock in the town square. At exactly 8 p.m., the bells chimed 8 times. As the final note faded, I became aware of a change in the atmosphere, subtle but palpable. It was as though the air itself had thickened to become more malevolent. The darkness outside the windows seemed deeper, more absolute, Somewhere in that darkness I knew Damon was awake and hunting. I tried to sleep but found it impossible. I lay in bed listening to every sound, every creak of the old building, every whisper of wind against the shutters. At 2:37 a.m. I heard something that made my blood freeze. Footsteps on the street below. Slow, measured, deliberate. The footsteps of something that had all the time in the world and knew exactly where it was going. I crept to the window and carefully peered through a gap in the curtains. In the dim light of the street lamp, I saw a figure walking down Main Street. He was tall, dressed all in black, with dark hair and pale skin that seemed to glow in the darkness. Even from a distance, I could feel the power emanating from him. This was Damon. This was the vampire that had terrorized Mystic Falls for over a century. He walked slowly down the street, looking up at the buildings, checking the locks on the storefronts. At one point, he stopped in front of the inn and looked directly at my window. I pulled back, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. When I looked again, a moment later, he was gone. I did not sleep at all that night. Morning arrived like an absolution. At 6 a.m., the sky began to lighten, and I could feel the fear beginning to loosen its grip on my throat. At 6:47 a.m., the sun crested the eastern hills, and the darkness retreated like a defeated enemy. I opened all the shutters and curtains, flooding the room with pale morning light. The town below was slowly coming back to life. Shop owners were opening their stores. A few people were walking along the sidewalk, moving with the normal pace of daytime activity. It was as though the night had been a nightmare from which the town was awakening. I showered and dressed and made my way downstairs to the inn's small dining room, where Eleanor had laid out a continental breakfast. Bagels, cream cheese, fresh fruit, and coffee. I filled a plate and tried to eat, but my appetite was diminished by the memory of the figure I had seen in the darkness. "You saw him," Eleanor said. It was not a question. "Yes," I admitted, at about 2:30 in the morning. "He walked down Main Street and looked directly at my window." Eleanor nodded slowly. "That is something Damon does sometimes. He likes to remind the town that he is still here, that he is still watching. It keeps us afraid. It keeps us compliant. Some nights he simply walks the streets. Other nights he tests the locks on doors and windows. On the worst nights he finds someone foolish enough to have broken the rules and he kills them. Why have the police not done anything?" I asked for what felt like the 100th time. "Because there is nothing they can do," Eleanor replied. "Damon is not just a criminal. He is something beyond the jurisdiction of normal law enforcement. The state police tried for years to solve the murders. But how do you build a case against a vampire? How do you present evidence to a jury that would convince them that a creature from folklore is responsible for the deaths?" Eventually, they gave up. They came to an understanding with the town council that we would police ourselves, that we would enforce the rules and prevent anyone from breaking them. "What happens if someone breaks the rules?" I asked. "What does Damon do?" "He hunts them," Eleanor said flatly. "He hunts them through the night with the patience and power of something that cannot be tired or frightened or reasoned with. He hunts them until he catches them, and then he kills them. The body usually appears a day or two later, left somewhere symbolic. The last victim was left in the town square, positioned to look like she was sleeping. A message. A reminder that Damon still rules this town. I spent most of the day in the inn, reading the books Eleanor had recommended and watching the town through the windows. At 4 p.m., Stefan appeared at my door with an offer to take me on a tour of the daytime Mystic Falls, the version of the town that existed under sunlight. We walked through the downtown area, and Stefan pointed out the various businesses and landmarks. The bookstore where his father worked, the library where his mother spent her days organizing books and cataloging acquisitions, the school where the children of Mystic Falls learned their lessons and grew accustomed to the rules. Everything appeared normal and mundane in the daylight. There was nothing in the architecture or the layout of the town that suggested the horrors that occurred after darkness fell. "How do the children cope?" I asked. "Growing up in a place where freedom essentially ends at sunset?" "They adapt," Stefan said. "They grow up knowing nothing else. The rules are taught to them before they can even speak. By the time they are old enough to understand what a vampire is, they have already internalized the precautions. It is not seen as oppressive so much as simply the way things are, just as children in cold climates learn to wear heavy coats without question." We stopped at a small cemetery on the eastern edge of town, surrounded by a wrought iron fence. The gravestones dated back more than a century. and I noticed that many of them bore the inscription "Taken by Darkness," or "Taken without warning." These were the graves of demons. Victims. There are more graves in this cemetery than should be here for a town of our size, Stefan explained. A normal town of 1,847 people would have a much smaller cemetery. But Damon has provided us with a steady supply of bodies to bury. Some of the graves are empty. Those are for people who disappeared and were never found. I stood before one particular grave and read the inscription: Matthew Hayes, beloved son and brother, taken June 3, 2007 at age 16. He shall rest in eternal peace. Matt, I said suddenly. Is there a man named Matt who lives in Mystic Falls now? Stefan shook his head. No, not currently.
Why do you ask?
I do not know, I replied, though a chill was running down my spine. For a moment I felt like I should know someone named Matt, like it was important. We left the cemetery and walked back toward the town center. The sun was beginning its descent and I could feel the familiar anxiety beginning to build in my chest. We had less than 2 hours before sunset. I need to talk to you about something, I said to Stefan as we walked. I came to Mystic Falls to escape something. To escape my life, but I think I may have escaped into something far worse. What are you thinking? Stefan asked. I am thinking that I should leave, I said. That I should get in my car and drive away and never come back. That I should forget this town exists. You could do that, Stefan agreed. Many people do. People pass through Mystic Falls and realize what is happening here and drive away as fast as they can. Usually they never return. They do not want to remember that a place like this exists. But you think I should stay, I said. It was not a question. I think, Stefan said carefully, that you came here for a reason. I think that you were running towards something, not away from something. And I think that you need to understand what that something is before you leave. We did not speak any further about the subject. When we reached the inn at 6:30 p.m., Stefan left me with a quiet goodbye and I went inside to prepare for the night. The second night was somehow worse than the first. I knew what to expect now, which made the fear more concrete and less abstract. I locked myself in my room and tried to distract myself with television, books, and wine. But nothing could shake the feeling of being trapped, of being hunted, of being prey in a predator's domain. At 9:15 p.m., I heard a knock on my door. It was not aggressive or demanding. Simply a knock. 3 quiet raps against the wooden frame. Who is there? I called out, remembering Eleanor's warning about Damon trying to trick people into opening doors. It is Stefan, came the response. I need to talk to you about something important. I was suspicious, but the voice sounded like Stefan's. I opened the door to find him standing in the hallway, fully dressed despite the late hour. His expression was serious. Come with me, he said. There is something you need to see. It is after 8 p.m., I protested. We should not be outside. I know the rules, Stefan said. But this is important. I would not ask if it was not absolutely necessary. Please, trust me. Against my better judgment, I followed Stefan out of the inn and into the darkened streets of Mystic Falls. The town at night was even more eerie than I had imagined, with pools of light from the street lamps creating islands of visibility in an ocean of shadow. We moved quickly through the downtown area, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting to see the pale figure from the first night. Stefan led me to the bookstore where his father worked. It was a narrow building squeezed between a closed barbershop and an empty storefront. He produced a key and unlocked the front door, ushering me inside quickly and then locking it behind us. Why are we here? I asked. Because there is a hidden room in this bookstore, Stefan replied, and inside that room is something that you need to know about. He navigated through the narrow aisles of books with practiced ease and led me to the back of the store. Behind a locked door that he unlocked with another key, there was a staircase leading downward. We descended into what appeared to be a basement, but it was far more than that. It was a library, walls of books from floor to ceiling, many of them ancient and obviously valuable. A large wooden desk held a journal and various documents and photographs. This is the real history of Mystic Falls, Stefan said. The history that is not taught in schools and not discussed in polite company. The history of how we came to understand Damon and how we came to coexist with him. He opened the large journal on the desk, and I began to read entries written in different handwriting from different time periods. Some entries were from the 1800s, describing the early encounters with Damon and the town's failed attempts to destroy him. Others were from the early 1900s, detailing attempts to understand the vampire's motivations and restrictions. Still others were from recent decades, tracking patterns in Damon's hunting and theorizing about his vulnerabilities. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Because I think you are important," Stefan said. "I think that Damon allowing you to survive the first night was significant. Normally, when he becomes aware of a new person in town, he tests them. He tries to frighten them away or he kills them outright. But you, he merely observed you. That is unusual. What are you suggesting?" I asked, though I thought I understood. "I am suggesting," Stefan said carefully, "that you might be someone Damon recognizes, or someone he thinks he recognizes. There is a section of these journals that mentions a recurring pattern. Every 30 years or so, a person comes to Mystic Falls. A person who has certain characteristics. Dark hair, around the same age, running away from something. And every time, Damon behaves differently around this person. Not as a predator behaves toward prey, but as something else. Something more like recognition." "That is insane," I said. "Yes," Stefan agreed. "But everything about Mystic Falls is insane. And the journal theorizes that these people might be connected to Damon's past. That they might be reincarnations or descendants of people he knew before he became a vampire. That there might be something binding him to certain souls." I closed the journal and looked at Stefan directly. "What was the name of the person who came 30 years ago?" "The person with these characteristics?" Stefan pointed to an entry dated 1995. The name written at the top of the entry was Matthew Hayes. My blood turned to ice in my veins. "Is he—" "He is alive," Stefan said. "He left Mystic Falls 30 years ago and never came back. But before he left, he kept detailed records of his interactions with Damon. He wrote extensively about what he believed Damon was. He theorized that Damon was not simply a predatory monster, but a creature bound by love and lost to certain souls. He believed that Damon was searching for someone he had lost long ago. And you think I am—" I could not complete the sentence. "I think you are connected to whatever Damon is searching for," Stefan said. "And I think that is why Damon did not kill you on the first night. I think that is why he came to look at your window. He recognized something in you." "I have to leave," I said, turning toward the stairs. "I cannot be here. I cannot be part of whatever this is." "You can leave," Stefan said, "but you should know that there is more to the story. There is something in these journals about why Damon hunts the way he does, about the rules that bind him, about what it would take to stop him." I paused on the stairs. "Stop him?" "Yes," Stefan said. "To actually stop him. To end the threat to Mystic Falls forever. The journal suggests that there is a way, but it would require someone who is connected to Damon's past. Someone who Damon recognizes and might listen to. Someone like you." "What way?" I asked, despite my fear. "I do not know," Stefan admitted. "The journal ends before it gets to that part. But the final entry, written by Matthew Hayes before he left, mentions that he had discovered something important, something that Damon had told him about his weakness. But the details are not recorded. Matthew wanted to protect the town. He did not want to write down information that Damon might find if he ever looked for it. I came back down the stairs and sat at the wooden desk. "Show me everything you have," I said. "All of it. I want to understand what is happening to me." We spent the rest of the night in that underground library, and I read every entry in the journal, every document, every theory that the people of Mystic Falls had developed over generations. By the time the sun began to rise at 6:45 a.m., I had absorbed more information than my mind could properly process. The journals revealed a complex picture of Damon that contradicted everything I had assumed about him. He was not a mindless killing machine. He was a being of extraordinary intelligence and culture. He read, he wrote. He played music on an old violin that someone had heard through the windows of an abandoned house in the forest. He seemed to operate under a strict code of rules. And while he killed, he did so with a kind of dark precision, always selecting those who had broken the rules of the town or who had come to Mystic Falls with violent intentions. One entry from 1923 described an encounter with a man named Thomas, a journalist who had come to investigate the murders. The journalist had planned to sneak into the forest at night to gather evidence. He had broken the rules deliberately, thinking that if he could capture Damon on film or record evidence of the murders, he could expose the truth to the world. Damon had killed him, but not in the way the townspeople expected. He had left the journalist's body in the town square with a newspaper clipping about his investigation placed on his chest. It was almost as though Damon was making a point, sending a message that he would not tolerate attempts to expose him or bring the outside world into his domain. Another entry, from 1967, described something even more peculiar. A young woman named Eleanor, who had been wandering the streets of Mystic Falls after a disagreement with her family, had found herself face to face with Damon in the darkness. Instead of killing her, he had spoken to her. He had asked her questions about her name, her family, her life. He had seemed deeply interested in her past, in where she had been born, who her relatives were. After nearly an hour of conversation, he had walked away, leaving her unharmed. She had survived that encounter and had gone on to become the innkeeper I had met on my first day in Mystic Falls. But the most revealing entries were written by Matthew Hayes. Matthew's account of his time in Mystic Falls was different from the other records. While he had observed and documented as other investigators had, he had also attempted to communicate with Damon. He had deliberately broken the rules, walking outside after 8 p.m. with the intention of being hunted. When Damon had found him, instead of running, Matthew had stood his ground and demanded conversation. The journal entries became increasingly poetic and philosophical as Matthew's account progressed. He wrote about Damon's loneliness, about the weight of a century and a half of existence in a small town, about the burden of being a creature that could never leave without causing chaos and destruction. Damon had told Matthew about his origins, about how he had been turned into a vampire by a woman he had loved deeply, a woman named Elena. Elena had been beautiful and passionate, and Damon had loved her with an intensity that transcended normal human emotion. But Elena had been human, and she had aged and died while Damon remained forever young and forever trapped in the night. According to Damon's account, the woman who had turned him into a vampire had done so as an act of love, not knowing that immortality was a curse rather than a gift. She had wanted them to be together forever, but she had not understood that forever was too long. She had not understood that Damon would watch civilizations rise and fall, would see the world transform around him, would lose everyone he loved to the inevitable march of time. Damon had come to Mystic Falls seeking refuge, seeking a place where he could exist without constant movement and hiding. He had found the town peaceful and remote, and he had decided to stay. But isolation bred hunger, and hunger bred the rules. Damon had created the rules himself, not to torment the townspeople, but to create a structure for his own existence, a way to feed without completely devastating the population. Matthew's final entries contained speculation about the nature of Damon's relationship to certain souls. Matthew believed that Damon was psychologically bound to specific individuals who resembled people from his past, that these people triggered something in him, some deep memory or connection that transcended normal vampire psychology. Matthew theorized that if someone could be found who was connected to Elena, the woman who had turned Damon, that person might be able to reach the humanity that still existed somewhere deep within the vampire's mind. The last written entry was dated 1995, 2 days before Matthew had left Mystic Falls. It read, "I have made contact with him. I have shown him that there is still goodness in the human heart, that not everyone fears him or hates him. I believe he is not truly evil, merely broken beyond repair by the weight of immortality. I am leaving Mystic Falls now, but I have a conviction that someone will come after me, someone connected to the same thread of souls that binds me to Damon. When that person arrives, they must know that Damon is capable of change. They must know that beneath the monster is still a man, still a soul searching for redemption or at least for understanding." When I finished reading, the sun was fully risen over Mystic Falls, and Stefan was watching me with an expression of careful expectation. "Now you understand," he said quietly. "I do not understand anything," I replied, though the words felt like a lie even as I spoke them. "What you are suggesting is insane. I am supposed to somehow connect with a vampire through some mystical bond? I am supposed to redeem an immortal creature by appealing to his humanity?" "I am not suggesting anything," Stefan said. "I am merely presenting you with information. What you do with that information is your choice." We left the bookstore as the town was waking up. People were opening their shops. Children were heading to school. Everything appeared normal and peaceful, as though the night horrors did not exist in the daylight hours. Stefan walked me back to the inn and we parted ways without further discussion. I spent that day in my room, wrestling with the implications of what I had learned. I called the bookstore and asked to speak with Stefan's father. He was a man named Damon, I learned, which struck me as darkly ironic. He invited me to come by the store and speak with him about Matthew Hayes. The bookstore was a treasure trove of old volumes and rare finds. Stefan's father, whose name was actually Michael, though he went by Mike, was a man in his 60s with gray hair and kind eyes. He welcomed me warmly and led me to a section in the back of the store where he kept a collection of Matthew's personal writings. Matthew was a brilliant young man, Mike said, handing me a bound manuscript. He came to Mystic Falls much like you did, running from something, seeking something. But unlike most people who pass through, he stayed. He became obsessed with understanding Damon. He believed that there was a way to break the curse that had bound our town for so long. Did he find a way? I asked. He found something, Mike replied, but he kept the details to himself. He was afraid that if the information was written down, Damon might discover it and take steps to prevent it from being used. But before he left, he told Stefan that when someone like him arrived, someone with the same characteristics, someone that Damon recognized, that person should be told to make contact with Damon directly, not as an enemy but as someone seeking understanding. How would I even do that? I asked. How would I initiate contact with a vampire? I do not know, Mike admitted. That is something you would have to figure out yourself. But I trust that if you are meant to do this, the way will present itself. I left the bookstore more troubled than when I had entered. The weight of expectation was crushing. I had come to Mystic Falls as a broken man seeking anonymity, and instead, I had become the center of some grand narrative that seemed designed by fate itself. That evening, as sunset approached, I made a decision. I would follow Matthew's path. I would break the rules deliberately. I would seek out Damon and demand answers. I would try to understand what it was about me that seemed to trigger recognition in a creature that should have viewed me as nothing more than food. At 8:15 p.m., I left the inn and ventured out into the darkness of Mystic Falls. The streets were empty, all the good citizens locked safely in their homes. Only the streetlights offered any illumination, creating pools of pale yellow light in an ocean of shadow. I walked toward the outskirts of town, moving with purpose, waiting for Damon to find me. It did not take long. At 8:47 p.m., I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see the pale figure emerging from the darkness. Damon was taller than I had realized from viewing him through my window. He was elegantly dressed in a black suit that seemed oddly formal for a hunting expedition. His dark eyes assessed me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "You are breaking the rules," he said, his voice like velvet wrapped around broken glass. "Yes," I replied, forcing myself to stand firm. "I wanted to talk to you." "Most people do not seek my company," Damon said. "They flee from me. They hide from me. Yet here you are walking toward me deliberately. Why?" "Because Matthew Hayes told me I should," I said. "Because I think there is something about me that matters to you. Something that connects me to your past." Damon's expression shifted, and for a moment I saw something like pain cross his face. "Matthew," he repeated, as though the name carried weight and memory. "You have spoken to Matthew?" "I have read his journals," I said. "I have learned about Elena, about your past, about why you have done what you have done." "You know nothing," Damon said harshly, but there was a tremor in his voice that suggested emotion beneath the anger. "You read words on a page and think you understand the weight of immortality? The burden of loving someone so deeply that you would curse yourself and them to eternity, rather than accept separation?" "No," I agreed. "I do not understand that. But I understand loss. I understand loneliness. I understand what it is like to be broken by life and to have nowhere to go." Damon circled me slowly, like a predator evaluating prey, but I no longer felt as though I was in immediate danger. This was theater of some kind, a performance that I was meant to witness. "Why does your face seem familiar to me?" Damon asked. "Why do I look at you and see echoes of the past? There have been others like this. Others who arrived and triggered something in me, some deep memory that I cannot quite grasp. Are you one of them? Or are you something different?" "I do not know," I said honestly. "But I know that I came to Mystic Falls for a reason. I know that I was meant to meet you. Damon stopped moving and looked directly into my eyes. If you are seeking redemption from me, you will find nothing. I am too far gone. I have killed too many people. I have caused too much suffering. I'm not seeking to redeem you, I said. I am seeking to understand you. I am seeking to know if there is truly nothing left of the man you were before you became what you are now. For a long moment, Damon did not respond. The night air seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his next move. Finally, he spoke. There is a place in the forest where I sometimes sit and remember, a place where I can almost feel what it was like to be human. If you wish to continue this conversation, meet me there tomorrow night. But know that if you lie to me, if you are working with the townspeople to betray me, I will end your life without hesitation. I am not lying, I said. Damon turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving me standing alone on the empty street. I had survived the encounter. I had initiated contact with the vampire, and I had been invited to meet him again. I walked back to the inn in a daze, barely processing what had occurred. When I reached my room, I found Stefan waiting for me, his face a mask of concern and anger. What were you thinking? He demanded. Breaking the rules like that? Going outside after dark? I had to know, I said. I had to know if the things in Matthew's journals were true. I had to know if Damon was truly more than just a monster. He will kill you, Stefan said flatly. Whatever connection you think you have, he will kill you. He has killed everyone who has tried to get close to him. No, I replied. He invited me to meet him again tomorrow night. He knows that I am different. He knows that I am connected to something in his past. Stefan sat down heavily on the edge of my bed. What is happening to you, Jeremy? You have been in this town for 3 days and you are already talking about making peace with a vampire. You are already talking about breaking the most fundamental rules of Mystic Falls. I do not know, I admitted, but I know that something is pulling me toward Damon, something that I cannot explain or control. It is like a force that has been acting on me my entire life, leading me toward this moment. The next day I spent my time preparing for the evening. I did not know how to prepare for a meeting with a vampire, so I did what felt natural. I wrote. I wrote down everything I could remember about my childhood, my family, my ancestors. I wrote about the dreams I had been having since childhood, dreams of a woman with dark hair and sad eyes. I wrote about the inexplicable sadness that had followed me through my entire life, the sense that I was missing something crucial, something that had been stolen from me before I was born. As I wrote, memories surfaced that I had not thought about in years. My grandmother telling me stories about our family history, a story about an ancestor who had died in 1860, a woman named Elena who had been engaged to be married but had disappeared. The family had never known what happened to her. She had simply vanished, leaving behind a devastated fiancé and a legacy of mystery. Elena, the same name that Damon had spoken with such longing and pain. I showed my writings to Stefan that afternoon, and I watched his face transform as he read them. My God, he whispered, you are descended from Elena. You carry her blood. That is why Damon recognizes you. That is why he has not killed you. Can we be certain? I asked. No, Stefan admitted. But it would explain everything. It would explain why Matthew had the same effect on Damon. Matthew was also descended from Elena's family. The connections between souls can transcend generations. Blood carries memory. It carries connection. That evening at 8:30 p.m., I left the inn again and made my way to the forest. Damon was waiting for me at a clearing about a mile from the edge of town. There was a stone bench in the clearing and Damon was sitting on it, looking up at the stars. I knew you would come, he said without turning to look at me. I needed to come, I replied, sitting on the ground before him. I needed to understand what is happening. You are descended from Elena, Damon said quietly. I can feel it in your blood. I can taste it in the air around you. You carry her essence. She was my ancestor, I confirmed. She disappeared in 1860. My family never knew what happened to her. She was beautiful, Damon said, his voice filled with ancient sorrow. She was the light of my world. I loved her more than I loved my own life. When she met a woman named Catherine who offered her immortality, offered her the chance to be with me forever, she accepted, but Catherine deceived us. She did not turn Elena into a vampire. She killed her. She murdered Elena to prevent us from being together. Tears ran down my face as I listened to Damon's story. The pain in his voice was raw and real, undimmed by the passage of time. I have searched for her across the centuries, Damon continued, across reincarnations and resurrections. I have watched souls that carry pieces of her consciousness move through the world. And every time I find one of them, I am reminded of what I have lost. Every time I must choose whether to kill them and end the pain, or let them live and carry the weight of their connection to me. What did Matthew teach you? I asked. What did he make you understand? Matthew taught me that immortality is not a curse, Damon said slowly. It is a choice. Every day I can choose to become the monster that everyone fears, or I can choose to be something else. Matthew taught me that there is still goodness in my heart even after all these years. He taught me that I do not have to kill the innocent. I can choose to hunt only those who deserve it, only those who come to Mystic Falls with malicious intent. Why do you stay in this town? I asked. Why not leave? Why not go somewhere else and try to build a new life? Because Mystic Falls is my penance, Damon replied. This town has become my monastery, my place of contemplation and atonement. By staying here, by limiting myself to hunting only those who break the rules, by accepting the restrictions I have created, I am trying to atone for the darkness I have unleashed. I am trying to prove that even a monster can change. Then change, I said. Stop killing altogether. Stop hunting. Stop being the thing that frightens this town. I cannot do that, Damon said. There is hunger in me that cannot be denied. I need blood to survive. It is not a choice or a preference. It is a biological necessity. But I can choose whose blood I take. I can choose to hunt only those who deserve it. What constitutes deserving? I asked. People who come to Mystic Falls with intentions to harm the community, Damon explained. People who break the rules deliberately and with malice. People who have already committed crimes and are fleeing justice. I do not kill the innocent. I do not kill those who simply wander into my domain by accident or misfortune. We talked through the night, and as we talked I began to understand Damon not as a monster, but as a being trapped between worlds, between his nature and his choices, between the hunger that defined him and the humanity that he was desperately trying to preserve. As the sun approached the eastern horizon, Damon stood to leave. You should go back to the inn, he said. Eleanor will be worried. What happens now? I asked. What happens to me? What happens to this connection between us? That is something you must decide, Damon replied. You can stay in Mystic Falls and become part of this community. You can continue to communicate with me, to understand me, to perhaps even help me find a path toward redemption, or you can leave and try to forget that this town and this vampire ever existed. Either way, I will not hunt you. You are under my protection now by virtue of your blood and our connection. I want to stay, I said without hesitation. I want to understand this more. I want to know if there is truly a way for you to escape the cycle of violence. Damon smiled, and for a moment I could see the man he had been before Catherine's transformation turned him into something else. There was sadness in that smile, but also hope, however small. I did not leave Mystic Falls. Instead, I called my former landlord in Boston and asked him to forward my belongings to the inn. Stefan helped me find a small apartment above the bookstore, and I settled into life in the town where the sun never shone too brightly, and the night always held secrets. Over the following weeks, I learned the true nature of Mystic Falls and the complex relationship it had developed with Damon. The rules were not simply arbitrary restrictions. They were a covenant, a mutual agreement between the vampire and the town. Damon hunted sparingly, only taking sustenance from those who posed a threat to the community. In return, the townspeople accepted his presence and agreed not to attempt to destroy him or drive him out. I also learned that Matthew Hayes had established a system of communication between the town and Damon. There was a series of signals and symbols that could be used to warn Damon of danger or to request his intervention in matters that threatened Mystic Falls. I became the keeper of this knowledge, the intermediary between the human community and the vampire who ruled the night. Tyler, one of the characters I had been told about but had not yet encountered, turned out to be the sheriff of Mystic Falls. He was a man in his early 30s with a worn face that spoke of carrying heavy responsibilities. When he learned about my arrangement with Damon, he was skeptical but ultimately accepting. He understood that the rules had to be maintained and that my relationship with Damon could serve a useful purpose in keeping the community safe. Matt, the other character, was a tragedy I had not anticipated. I discovered that the grave I had seen in the cemetery belonged to the living Matt, the one who had come to Mystic Falls 30 years ago as Stefan's predecessor in understanding and documenting the truth about the town, the Matthew I had read about in the journals. He had left Mystic Falls and disappeared from the historical record, but the town had memorialized him anyway, treating him as though he had died because in a sense he had. The person who left Mystic Falls was not the same person who had arrived. He had been fundamentally transformed by his experience with Damon and by the knowledge he had gained about his own ancestry. I wondered if I too would be transformed by my time in this place, whether the person who left Mystic Falls would be recognizable as the person who had arrived. The winter came to Mystic Falls with a vengeance that year. The snow piled up until the streets were barely passable, and the cold settled in like an unwelcome guest that had no intention of leaving. Inside the town, the life continued as it always did. The shops opened and closed on schedule. The children attended school. Life proceeded with the normalized rhythm of a community that had learned to live with the extraordinary. And I met with Damon regularly, in the clearing in the forest where the trees created a natural shelter and the moonlight could filter through the branches. I brought him texts about philosophy and history, about the nature of immortality and the burden of consciousness stretched across centuries. We discussed the meaning of existence, the purpose of survival, the question of whether a creature like Damon could ever find redemption or if he was forever bound to his nature. Damon told me more about Elena and about the love that had driven him to accept transformation. He told me about the centuries that followed her death, about the pain of searching for her through reincarnations, about the countless lifetimes where he had glimpsed echoes of her soul in other people only to lose them again. "Do you think she would have wanted this?" I asked one night in early December. "Do you think Elena would have wanted you to spend eternity searching for her across the ages?" "No," Damon said quietly. "Elena would have wanted me to let her go, to accept her death and move on. But I could not do it. Love made me irrational. Love made me willing to defy death itself. And that irrationality has defined me for over 150 years. Then let her go," I said. "Forgive yourself for not being able to save her. Stop searching for her in the faces of the living." Damon looked at me with an expression of such profound sadness that I felt tears running down my own cheeks. "If I let her go," he said, "then what is the purpose of my immortality? What is the point of continuing to exist if not to find her again?" "The point is to live," I said. "The point is to find meaning in the present moment, not in the past. The point is to help others, to protect them, to build something positive rather than destroying yourself in pursuit of something that cannot be recovered." "You sound like Matthew," Damon said. "You sound like someone who still believes that redemption is possible for someone like me." "I do believe it," I said. "And I think part of you believes it too. Otherwise, you would not have allowed me to live. You would not be sitting here having this conversation with me." On the first day of winter, exactly 2 weeks after I arrived in Mystic Falls, Damon did something unprecedented. He came to the town during daylight, not to hunt, but to visit the cemetery where Elena's memorial stone had been placed by the townspeople more than a century ago. I accompanied him, walking openly through the streets of Mystic Falls alongside a vampire. The townspeople I encountered did not interfere. They had learned to accept that I had authority in matters relating to Damon, that I could make decisions about when the rules could be bent or altered. At Elena's grave, Damon knelt in the snow and placed his hand against the cold stone. I could not see his face, but I could hear the sound of his weeping, a sound so raw and ancient and full of grief that it seemed to carry the weight of all the centuries he had lived. "I release you," he whispered. "I release you from the burden of my search. I release you from the obligation to find me in every new life. I release you and I release myself. Forgive me, Elena. Forgive me for not being strong enough to let you go." When Damon stood and turned away from the grave, his expression had changed. Something had shifted in him, some fundamental alteration in his being. The predatory aspect of his nature was still present, but it had been tempered by something new, something that resembled acceptance. "It is finished," he said to me. "The searching is over. I can finally rest." That night in the clearing in the forest, Damon made a proposal that would change Mystic Falls forever. "I want to end the rules," he said. "I want to free this town from the restrictions that have bound them for so long. Can you do that?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. Yes, Damon replied. I can do it, but it will require something from you. It will require you to be the bridge between my old life and my new one. It will require you to be the keeper of the story of what happened here, to be the one who remembers and can explain to others why Mystic Falls can finally be free. What does freedom look like? I asked. It looks like people being able to go outside after 8 p.m. without fear, Damon said. It looks like Damon becoming something other than the monster that hunts the night. It looks like transformation and redemption and the possibility of change. But you will still need blood, I said. You will still need to hunt. Yes, Damon acknowledged. But I will hunt elsewhere. I will hunt far from Mystic Falls, in places where the victims of my hunger will not include innocent people. I will limit my feeding to those who have committed crimes, who prey on others who deserve the justice that I can provide. I will become a guardian rather than a predator. The transformation of Mystic Falls took time. It could not happen overnight. There had to be meetings with the town council. There had to be explanations and discussions and a careful negotiation of the terms under which the rules would be relaxed. But gradually, over the course of the winter and into the spring, the strictures that had bound the town began to loosen. The first public acknowledgement came in early spring when Tyler, the sheriff, called a town meeting and announced that the dangerous individual who had hunted Mystic Falls for over a century had chosen to leave. He did not explain the details of what had happened or how the change had come about. He simply said that the threat had been neutralized and that the town was free. Of course, that was not entirely true. Damon did not leave Mystic Falls. Instead, he became a ghost in the community, a presence that was felt but not seen, existing in the spaces between official acknowledgement and comfortable denial. The townspeople could pretend he was gone while understanding on some level that he was still present, still watching, still protecting the community from threats both internal and external. And I became the bridge between the human world and his, the translator of his intentions and the keeper of the secrets that had to remain hidden. I published the story of Matthew Hayes' discovery, carefully edited and presented as a work of fiction, so that others would understand the nature of Mystic Falls and the compromise that had made it possible to survive under impossible circumstances. The tourists began to come back to Mystic Falls. The town, which had been slowly dying under the weight of its terrible secret, began to experience a revival. The bookstore where I worked flourished. The inn where I had first arrived filled with guests who wanted to experience the charm of a quaint New England town. And I remained, anchored to Mystic Falls by bonds that were both psychic and emotional, connected to Damon through the blood that ran in my veins, heir to the legacy of Elena and Matthew and all the others who had touched this place and been transformed by it. 1 year after my arrival, Stefan and I were working in the bookstore when a new customer walked through the door. She was a woman in her late 20s with long dark hair and sad eyes that seemed to carry the weight of ancient memory. Stefan and I exchanged a glance, and without speaking, we both understood what was happening. Another one had come, another soul carrying the resonance of Elena, drawn to Mystic Falls by forces beyond her conscious understanding. I showed her to the section with books about the town's history and watched as she began to read. I wondered what she would discover, what connection she would make, how she would navigate the relationship between the human world and the extraordinary that existed just beyond the edges of normal perception. Stefan leaned over to me and whispered, "Do you think Damon will know about her?" "Yes," I replied. "He will know. He has always known when one of Elena's descendants arrives." "What will he do?" Stefan asked. "What he has always done," I said. "He will observe. He will wait. And when the time is right, he will make himself known and begin the conversation that connects past to present, that binds soul to soul across the centuries." The woman looked up from the book she was reading and made eye contact with me. In that moment of connection, I saw recognition in her eyes, a sense that she had been searching for something without understanding what it was, and she had finally found the place where that search could come to an end. I smiled at her, and she returned the smile hesitantly, as though she was not quite sure why she felt so drawn to this stranger in a small-town bookstore. "Welcome to Mystic Falls," I said quietly. "I think you will find that this place has a way of changing people." The woman nodded slowly, and I understood that another chapter in the story of Mystic Falls was about to begin. Another soul would arrive, Another connection would be forged. Another transformation would occur. The cycles would continue. Generation after generation, soul after soul, bound together by blood and history, and the inexplicable force that drew people to this town and held them here, transforming them, redeeming them, giving them purpose in a world that often seemed designed to strip away meaning and leave only emptiness behind. And I would be here to witness it, to guide it, to ensure that the bridge between the human and the vampire remained strong and true, and that the promise Damon had made to Elena all those centuries ago, the promise to love, eternally and search across all the ages, would be honored not through obsessive pursuit but through acceptance and transformation, and the redemptive power of choosing to be something better than one's nature demanded. Mystic Falls was no longer a town of fear and darkness. It had become something else entirely. A place of mysteries and second chances where impossible things happened and people discovered who they were meant to become all along.